The first thing anyone noticed about Evelyn Parker was her posture. Straight-backed, calm, deliberate. At 57, with streaks of silver threading through her chestnut hair, she carried the dignity of someone who had survived storms no one would willingly face. She had walked through fire before, metaphorically, and she was about to learn, quite literally. Tonight, though, Evelyn felt a tension that made the air around her hum. Something was different. Something was about to happen that would shatter the careful rhythm of her life, the life she had built with her own hands, stitch by stitch, sacrifice by sacrifice. Evelyn's apartment on the west end of Atlanta had been quiet that evening. The usual smell of polished wood and fresh geraniums from her balcony lingering faintly as she left. She had spent the day preparing herself, choosing the silk blouse that brought out the soft gold in her eyes, the skirt that allowed her to move with grace, even under stress. She had wanted to look respectable, powerful, without shouting it, like the life she had led since Lucas's father abandoned them when he was just 5. Every day had been a testament to perseverance. Her tailoring shop, her dedication, the countless nights she stayed awake to finish orders while Lucas slept beside her, dreaming of a world he hadn't yet earned the right to navigate alone. Lucas Parker, her only child, was now 28. The boy who had once clasped her hand tightly in the kitchen, eyes wide with admiration and promise, had grown into a man with his own life, his own love, and tonight, his own wedding. Evelyn should have been proud. She was proud, but pride felt tainted by a creeping, insidious fear. She had met Victoria Langley once before this evening, briefly at a brunch where polite smiles and tight hands had been exchanged. Victoria, with her perfectly coiffed hair and laugh that didn't reach her eyes, had looked at Evelyn in a way that suggested ownership, or perhaps judgment. Something about the way she tilted her chin, scanning Evelyn from head to toe, had left an indelible mark. The banquet hall at the Langley estate was a cathedral of celebration. Chandeliers hung like frozen fire, spilling light over tables dressed in ivory linens and polished silver. The scent of jasmine and roasted meats mingled with the faint, sweet tang of desserts lined meticulously along the sideboard. Guests murmured politely, champagne flutes clinking, laughter rising and falling like a carefully orchestrated symphony. Evelyn moved through it all with the calm of a woman who had learned how to navigate social minefields, nodding and smiling, but always with an eye. That eye, sharp as a hawk's, scanned for subtle betrayals, for hints of the danger she could feel threading through the air. Victoria Langley was already there, seated in a chair that looked like it had been chosen for a queen, though it was far too large for someone who had yet to earn her crown. She laughed easily, just enough to mask the meticulous calculation behind every movement, every tilt of her head. Evelyn caught her glance from across the room and froze, the hair on her arms rising. She couldn't explain why, but a small, ancient part of her brain screamed, "Watch her. She's not who she seems." And though Evelyn had always prided herself on rationality, experience had taught her to trust instinct. That subtle unease, that tiny vibration of warning, was one she could not shake. Guests were beginning to gather around the tables, plates clinking as waiters served hors d'oeuvres, miniature crab cakes, stuffed mushrooms, delicate pastries that smelled of almonds and caramel. Evelyn's hand twitched slightly, fingers brushing the hem of her blouse. She was aware of every sensation, the silken fabric under her skin, the soft thrum of music vibrating through the parquet floors, and the faint, sweet trace of perfume that belonged to Victoria. She inhaled slowly, deliberately, grounding herself. She had prepared for tonight, mentally rehearsed every polite interaction. But preparation, she was learning, only went so far. Lucas approached her then, his expression bright, confident, the excitement of a groom mingling with that familiar, comforting respect he had always held for his mother. "You look amazing, Mom," he said, his deep voice a warmth against the tension building in her chest. He took her hand briefly, squeezing it. "I'm glad you're here." Evelyn smiled, feeling a pang of tenderness. This was her boy, her heart walking on two legs. But even that moment of warmth was fleeting. She had learned over the years that love did not protect one from betrayal. Sometimes the ones you cherished most carried the sharpest knives. As the wedding party gathered near the head table, Evelyn felt a shift in the room's atmosphere. The chatter died down, and the soft hum of music became more pronounced, almost eerie in its clarity. She noticed how Victoria's gaze lingered, not on Lucas, but on her, Evelyn. There was a patience in that stare, a slow, deliberate assessment that made the hairs along Evelyn's neck stand on end. She understood, without any doubt, that tonight something would happen. She could feel the tension threading through the air like live wires, and yet she remained poised, moving with the grace and control that had been her armor for decades. The meal began. Silver cutlery clinked against plates, servers moved like shadows across the polished floor, and Evelyn tried to focus on the familiar ritual of dining: polite sips of water, careful bites of carefully prepared food, the social dance she had perfected over years. But Victoria's presence was a constant, looming threat. The slightest shift in her posture, the minute tightening of her jaw, the way she tilted her glass just so, all conveyed intent. Evelyn could almost see the malice simmering just beneath that polished exterior, hidden behind practiced smiles and delicate gestures. Then it happened. Evelyn noticed it before she could even process. Victoria lifted a bowl from the table, her movements smooth, almost rehearsed. Evelyn's pulse quickened, and instinctive dread unfurled in her chest. She tried to maintain calm, to remind herself that she was prepared, that she had survived before, that her mind was sharp and her body capable. But instinctively, her breath caught in her throat. Something in the way Victoria's eyes narrowed, the slight curl of her lips, told Evelyn this was not just a minor act of rudeness or subtle insult. No, this was something premeditated. Evelyn's heart pounded as the room's noise seemed to fade into the background. Every laugh, every clink of a glass, every whispered conversation became distant and muffled. Her attention narrowed until it was entirely focused on Victoria and the small, unassuming bowl she now held in her hands. Time seemed to stretch, elongated by the dread that gripped her chest. She had faced hardship before, yes, but this was uncharted territory. The fear was sharp, immediate, tangible, but so was her resolve. She had survived betrayal, abandonment, the grinding loneliness of raising Lucas alone. She would survive this too. And still, her body reacted before her mind could catch up. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear alone, but from adrenaline, from the acute awareness that every moment could change her life irrevocably. She felt the weight of the room, the eyes of dozens of guests, unaware, oblivious, yet somehow complicit in the silence. And she understood, with a clarity that made her stomach tighten, that tonight she would be tested. Her dignity, her patience, her control, all of it. And whether she would emerge intact was still uncertain. Evelyn Parker, who had weathered storms no one could see, who had stitched her life together thread by thread with nothing but her own hands, now faced a moment that defied preparation. She was aware of every detail: the shimmer of the chandelier, the glint of silverware, the soft rustle of silk dresses, the faint, almost imperceptible hiss of hot liquid against ceramic. Her pulse raced, yet she stood poised, every muscle tense but under control, ready for what was coming. And as Victoria Langley's gaze met hers across the table, Evelyn felt a moment of perfect clarity. Whatever happened next, she would meet it on her terms. She would not crumble. She would not scream. She would survive. Evelyn Parker stood in the quiet of her car for a moment, the hum of the engine beneath her a muted echo of the chaos she had just left behind. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension seep out with the breath she had been holding for what felt like hours. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, gripping lightly, not from fear, but to remind herself that she was still in control. Control had been the backbone of her existence ever since the day she had become a widow at 32, left alone with a 5-year-old son and a world that seemed suddenly colder and infinitely harsher. Raising Lucas had been everything she thought it would be and nothing she imagined. Every sleepless night, every sick day, every moment of worry had carved her spirit into something resilient, something unyielding. She had learned the language of patience and perseverance in a way few ever did. She had learned to balance sorrow with hope, exhaustion with unwavering determination. She had sewn her way through the early years, tailoring gowns, dresses, and blouses for women who wanted elegance without ostentation, women who trusted her to understand the secrets a fabric could hold. Every stitch was a testament to survival, every hem a quiet declaration of independence. Her small shop on the ground floor of her West End apartment building had become both sanctuary and proving ground. The smell of freshly pressed fabric, the gentle hum of her sewing machine, the precise rhythm of her scissors against delicate cloth, these were the things that grounded her, that reminded her she could build a life from nothing. She would open her eyes at 5 a.m, Lucas still curled in his small bed, and prepare coffee and breakfast before the sun had fully risen. He would eat quietly, content to watch his mother move through the routines that had become second nature to them both. Lucas had been extraordinary even as a child, not just clever or disciplined, but profoundly empathetic, with a sense of responsibility that belied his years. Evelyn had watched him learn the world cautiously, asking questions that revealed his curiosity and his capacity for understanding more than most adults gave children credit for. "Mama," he would say, sitting at the little breakfast table, "when I grow up, I'll make sure you don't have to work so hard anymore." And Evelyn, exhausted, smiling through the fatigue, would squeeze his small hands and believe him with her whole heart. She had always believed him, always trusted that his love was steadfast, even as life had forced her to navigate the treacherous waters of independence alone. Her days were regimented, but never dull. She had known struggle, yes, but she had known joy in its quietest forms. The scent of blooming geraniums on her balcony, the delicate morning sun spilling through her apartment windows, the occasional laugh that bubbled up from Lucas when she read to him or played with him in the living room, all of it had sustained her in ways money could never buy. She had learned painfully and irrevocably that true wealth was in the bonds one cultivated, the patience one exercised, the love one gave unconditionally. Yet, as she drove through the dark streets back from the wedding, the calm she had cultivated over decades was tinged with bitterness she had not anticipated. Victoria Langley had brought a presence into the room that was impossible to ignore. There was a subtle but undeniable air of superiority about her, a quiet arrogance that suggested she measured the worth of others against a standard Evelyn had never encountered before. It was in the tilt of her head, the smirk that flickered across her lips, the way she carried herself as though the entire banquet hall existed solely to validate her existence. She had seen it, felt it, and instinctively recognized the danger it posed, not just to her, but to the carefully nurtured bond she shared with her son. Victoria's jealousy was a predator hidden in plain sight. It was almost imperceptible, masked by charm and etiquette, but Evelyn sensed it in the micro movements, in the way her eyes lingered on Lucas longer than was polite, in the subtle dismissiveness when she spoke to Evelyn. The woman had carefully observed her for weeks, cataloging reactions, calculating weaknesses, and yet Evelyn had learned to mask her own fears. She had survived hardship by reading people, by anticipating threats, and by preserving her dignity even in the face of humiliation. Tonight, that skill would be tested in ways she could never have anticipated. Evelyn thought back to the early years after her husband had left. The world had seemed suddenly hostile, the nights unbearably long, the silence in the apartment almost physical. But she had discovered a strength that had lain dormant, a reservoir of resilience that had been awakened by necessity. She had become not just a mother, but a teacher, a provider, a protector, a shield against all that threatened her child. Lucas had grown up watching her fight battles unseen by the world, learning courage from example, absorbing lessons in integrity and hard work, not from words, but from action. Every late-night sewing session, every skipped meal so he could have breakfast, every tear she had wiped from his cheeks before he even noticed, all of it had shaped a boy who would become a man capable of love, responsibility, and empathy. And yet, the events of tonight had shown her that life's lessons were never complete. There were people who wore smiles as armor, who wielded charm as a weapon, and who measured themselves against the suffering of others. Victoria Langley was such a person, and the realization struck Evelyn with a mix of disbelief and clarity. She had raised her son in a cocoon of love and protection, but the world outside was not as forgiving nor as honest. The betrayal she had just endured was a stark reminder that love and trust, while precious, were not guarantees against cruelty. As the city lights flickered past the car windows, Evelyn's mind wandered to Lucas's childhood. She remembered evenings spent reading stories by candlelight when the power went out, teaching him multiplication tables with patience despite her own exhaustion, explaining the subtle mechanics of the sewing machine when he wanted to learn. She remembered the first time he had sewn a simple button onto a shirt, the pride in his tiny face mirroring the pride she had felt in herself for enduring the years that had brought them both here. Each memory was a balm, a quiet affirmation that she had succeeded where so many had failed. She had built a life with love as the foundation, strength as the mortar, and resilience as the roof that sheltered them both. Yet, even those fond memories were now shadowed by tonight's humiliation. The physical sting of the hot soup, the public nature of the assault, Lucas's silence, all of it replayed in her mind with a cruel insistence. And still, beneath the pain, beneath the shock, beneath the swirling storm of emotions, there was a spark that reminded Evelyn Parker of who she was, of the battles she had survived, of the dignity she carried as both mother and woman. She was not finished. She would not crumble. The lessons of her past, the love for her son, the patience she had cultivated over decades, all would guide her in the confrontation that lay ahead, though the form it would take was not yet clear. In the quiet of her car, with the street lights casting fleeting shadows over her face, Evelyn Parker allowed herself a rare smile. It was not one of triumph, not yet, but of acknowledgement. She had weathered storms before, had stitched a life from frayed threads, had taught her son the value of integrity and resilience. And now, confronted with betrayal in its most blatant form, she understood that her strength was not only tested, but reaffirmed. She had survived the impossible once. She would survive it again. Victoria Langley might have believed she had power over the room, over the situation, over Evelyn. But what she could not see, what she could never predict, was the reservoir of strategy, patience, and unspoken force that Evelyn carried. The night's events were only the beginning. The battle was far from over, and Evelyn Parker, who had turned every setback into a lesson, every heartbreak into a weapon of resilience, was only just beginning to move. As the car hummed steadily beneath her, the dark streets of Buckhead stretching ahead like a liver of quiet menace, Evelyn Parker felt the convergence of memory and resolve, of past triumphs and future determination. She thought of Lucas, the boy she had raised with love and unwavering discipline, now a man whose life had intersected with danger and deceit she could not yet fully unravel. And she understood, as she had always understood in moments of trial, that survival was not merely physical. It was emotional. It was psychological. It was the quiet, unyielding assertion of oneself against forces determined to undermine it. Evelyn Parker, widow, mother, survivor, tailor, architect of her own life, breathed in deeply and exhaled, letting the tension ease slightly, knowing full well that it would return. Life had a way of testing one's limits, of pushing even the strongest to the brink. But Evelyn had always found a way back. She had stitched together not only garments, but destinies, had nurtured love and integrity, had faced the world's indifference and cruelty, and had emerged not broken, but sharpened, refined, formidable. Tonight, that truth would guide her, as it had guided her through countless nights of fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty. And in that quiet moment, as headlights danced across her face and the city murmured its indifferent lullaby, Evelyn Parker knew one thing with absolute clarity. She was not finished. The events of tonight were merely a prologue. The lessons of her past would inform her strategy, the love for her son would fuel her resolve, and the strength she had cultivated over decades, tested in ways others could scarcely imagine, would rise once more, fierce and unyielding, ready to confront whatever Victoria Langley or anyone else would dare to unleash. The doors of the Langley estate opened like a portal into a world that was simultaneously breathtaking and suffocating. Evelyn Parker stepped inside, her heels clicking against polished marble, echoing faintly in the cavernous hall. Light cascaded from crystal chandeliers above, scattering prisms across the high ceilings and ornate moldings. European elegance met modern American grandeur. White roses in tall glass vases, gold-trimmed plates, and soft ivory linens covering every table. The scent of roses mingled with the subtle aroma of roasted meats and fresh-baked bread, an olfactory symphony designed to impress. Music floated in the air, a delicate string quartet playing melodies that made the room feel simultaneously intimate and vast. Evelyn's heart beat faster, a quiet drum of anticipation, tension, and an almost unbearable awareness that tonight nothing would be ordinary. Guests milled about, champagne flutes in hand, laughter ebbing and flowing like gentle waves against the shore. Men in tailored suits spoke quietly with polished gestures. Women in gowns that glimmered under the chandelier light whispered compliments and jokes, their voices carrying a curious blend of genuine delight and polite rivalry. The overall atmosphere was intoxicating, yet fragile, as if the slightest misstep could shatter the pristine illusion of harmony. Evelyn moved through it with the practiced grace of someone who had spent decades reading rooms, assessing intentions, and quietly defending herself from unseen threats. Her eyes flicked from face to face, noting subtle cues, the way a guest's fingers tightened around a glass, or the briefest glance exchanged across a table. Victoria Langley, as expected, was impossible to miss. She floated through the crowd with the confidence of someone born into perfection, her every movement calculated to project charm, authority, and a superiority that demanded recognition. Evelyn noted the subtle microaggressions that Victoria delivered with such effortless precision. A slight lift of an eyebrow when Evelyn approached, a smile that did not reach her eyes, a comment about the tailoring of Evelyn's dress, delivered with a tone that could be mistaken for compliment but carried the weight of judgment. It was the kind of social precision honed over years in elite circles, a weapon wielded with grace and accuracy. Evelyn felt a small tightening in her chest, an instinctual awareness that each subtle barb, each microaggression was not accidental. Victoria was testing her, measuring her reactions, probing for weaknesses, and Evelyn, for all her poise, could feel the growing heat of anticipation, a low simmering of unease that suggested tonight's events would not end with polite smiles. The tension in her shoulders, the tightening of her jaw, were reminders that she must remain vigilant. She had survived adversity before, yes, but this was different. This was deliberate, public, and orchestrated in a way that threatened not only her dignity, but the sanctity of the bond she shared with her son. Lucas Parker appeared at her side then, his hand brushing lightly against hers in a moment of reassurance. He was radiant, a man fully comfortable in the glow of his own celebration. Yet Evelyn could see the subtle lines of tension around his eyes, the small furrow of concern that betrayed his awareness of the charged atmosphere. "Mom," he whispered, his voice low and grounding, "you look incredible. Thank you for being here." Evelyn gave a soft nod, a smile that was more acknowledgement than pleasure, and allowed herself a moment to breathe. The room felt suffocating, even as it dazzled, and she relied on the familiarity of Lucas's presence to anchor her nerves. The first course was served, delicately plated seafood, tender vegetables, and sauces that glistened under the light. Waiters moved with seamless efficiency, balancing trays with an artful precision, and Evelyn observed them with a professional eye, noting the timing, the placement, the rhythm that made the room appear effortless despite the careful choreography required. Guests murmured appreciation, raised glasses, and complimented the chef, their words polite, but their attention occasionally flicking toward the head table where Victoria had taken her place with Lucas and his bride, Olivia. Victoria's subtle dominance continued unabated. She made comments under her breath, just loud enough for Evelyn to hear, about Evelyn's posture, the choice of her blouse, the angle of her smile. Evelyn held back a sharp retort. The instinct to defend herself warred against decades of learned restraint. She had mastered the art of subtle retaliation in private, and she knew tonight was not the time for public confrontation. Instead, she focused on controlling her breathing, grounding herself in her awareness of every sensation, the slight tickle of silk against skin, the faint clink of cutlery, the smooth hum of conversation, all meticulously cataloged as part of a mental map she would use later.
Evelyn's mind wandered momentarily to Lucas's childhood, drawing strength from the memory. She remembered teaching him to ride a bike in the small park near their apartment, the look of sheer concentration on his face, the triumphant laughter when he finally mastered the balance. She remembered nights spent sitting beside his bed, reading stories long after she was exhausted, singing softly to lull him to sleep. Those memories were armor tonight, a reservoir of strength that reminded her she was capable of enduring whatever Victoria Langley might attempt. But there was no denying the simmering threat. Evelyn could feel it in the tightening of Victoria's jaw, the precision with which she held her glass, the calculated way she guided conversations to ensure Evelyn felt minor, out of place, even invisible. Every subtle glance, every carefully measured tone was a probe into Evelyn's defenses, a test of her poise, a challenge to her authority as Lucas's mother. And Evelyn, with decades of patience and awareness, met each challenge without faltering, her own eyes coldly assessing, calculating, ready for the storm she sensed on the horizon. The music shifted, the soft strings giving way to a gentle piano piece, and the room seemed to exhale collectively. Yet Evelyn remained alert, her senses sharp, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the brief glance exchanged between Victoria and one of the waitstaff, the almost imperceptible smirk that passed over her lips. Something was coming. She did not know when or exactly how, but instinct whispered with a clarity that left no room for doubt. Tonight, a line would be crossed. And Evelyn Parker, who had faced abandonment, financial hardship, and the trials of raising a child alone, would meet it head on. She observed Olivia, her son's bride, radiant and laughing, completely unaware of the undercurrents at play. Evelyn felt a pang of sympathy for her, a recognition of innocence amidst the calculated coldness surrounding them. She wanted to warn her, to prepare her, but knew that some battles had to be faced alone, that some lessons came at a cost. Evelyn reminded herself of her own history, of the nights she had endured silently, the humiliation she had suffered privately, the resilience she had cultivated in the crucible of experience. She would not fail now. She would not break under scrutiny, manipulation, or veiled threats. As the first toast was proposed, Evelyn's pulse quickened. Glasses rose in unison, the clinking sound both celebratory and foreboding. Victoria's eyes met hers across the room, a spark of challenge, a silent assertion of dominance. Evelyn met that gaze without faltering, holding her own ground with a quiet, unwavering strength. Every guest, absorbed in the ritual of toasts and laughter, remained oblivious to the tension coiling between the two women, a tension that promised that tonight would not pass without the spectacle. Evelyn allowed herself one final moment of introspection before the first course plates were cleared. The room was beautiful, filled with light and laughter, yet the undercurrent of danger was undeniable. Victoria Langley's poised malice was a force to be reckoned with, but Evelyn Parker had faced storms far fiercer, and her strength lay not only in her resilience, but in her patience, her observation, and her willingness to act decisively when the moment demanded it. Tonight would be a test of all she had built within herself, and Evelyn Parker, widow, mother, survivor, was ready. The room seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn Parker, poised and controlled for hours, felt an unfamiliar tension coil through her chest. Victoria Langley, with the precision of a predator and the subtle malice that had simmered throughout the evening, moved deliberately toward the head table. Evelyn's eyes followed her, each step measured, each movement meticulous. A small, unassuming bowl appeared in Victoria's hands, innocuous at first glance. But Evelyn had learned the language of intent, the silent communication of danger hidden in the ordinary, and she recognized it immediately. Time seemed to slow, the ambient chatter of the banquet hall fading into a muffled hum. Every detail sharpened, the glint of crystal, the soft rustle of silk, the polished sheen of silverware. And then, in a moment that split the world until before and after, Victoria tilted the bowl. The hot gumbo, steaming and thick with spices, cascaded in a wave toward Evelyn's face. Evelyn's instinct screamed. There was no time to move, no time to deflect. The searing liquid struck her skin with an almost electric precision, pain erupting instantly, sharp and consuming. Her blouse, ivory silk, absorbed the broth immediately, clinging to her skin as if trying to hold her dignity in place while it burned. The smell of pepper, garlic, and herbs filled her nostrils, mingling with the acrid sting of heat against her flesh. Her eyes watered violently, and she could feel the heat penetrate beneath the surface, a reminder of the vulnerability even the strongest must confront. Yet, even in the midst of such pain, Evelyn Parker did not scream. She did not collapse. Every muscle in her body tensed, a testament to the years of survival, resilience, and unwavering control she had cultivated. She reached instinctively for a linen napkin, pressed it to her face with as much grace as she could muster. The room seemed to slow further, as if the universe itself had paused to witness the unthinkable act. Guests stared, frozen, unsure whether to intervene or avert their eyes. Murmurs rose, but were swallowed by a sudden, suffocating silence. And then the sound that hurt more than the burn. The slow, deliberate laugh of Victoria, soft but laden with satisfaction. She stepped back slightly, chin lifted, eyes narrowed in triumph, as if marking the culmination of a plan months or even years in the making. Evelyn's vision blurred, yet she forced herself to meet Victoria's gaze. There was a spark in her eyes, not fear, but something far more potent. An unspoken warning that the dignity Victoria sought to strip away was unyielding. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her jaw firm, as she slowly, deliberately straightened her back. Pain radiated through her body, yet she remained upright, a figure of composure amidst the chaos. Every detail of her being screamed survival, mastery over humiliation, and an unwavering refusal to yield. Lucas Parker, seated at the head table, froze. Evelyn noticed the faint furrow in his brow, the way his hands tightened briefly against the edge of the table. And then came the words that cut deeper than any physical burn. "She's right, Mom." Silence fell like a heavy shroud. Evelyn felt the floor beneath her metaphorically collapse. The boy she had raised with tireless devotion, the man whose love she had trusted implicitly, had not moved to protect her. His voice was calm, almost detached, as though pronouncing a truth he believed to be unassailable. Betrayal had never felt so immediate, so raw, so sharply personal. Her mind reacted faster than her body could react. She did not scream, she did not cry, she did not lash out. Instead, she performed an action that took every ounce of control she possessed. With deliberate calm, she pressed the napkin harder against her burning skin, stood, and began walking toward the double doors. Each step was measured, dignified. Yet beneath the surface, adrenaline surged like wildfire. Pain and humiliation coursed through her veins, but so did clarity, strategy, and a quiet, simmering fury. As she reached the doors, Evelyn's mind worked rapidly. She retrieved her phone from her clutch with an almost imperceptible movement, her fingers trembling slightly but her resolve unwavering. The number she dialed had been saved weeks ago, a contingency she had prepared with careful discretion. As the phone rang, the world outside seemed distant, reduced to the muffled hum of voices and the occasional clink of silverware. She pressed the device to her ear, and when the call was answered, she spoke only 3 words. "It's time." The voice on the other end, steady and assured, acknowledged without question. Evelyn hung up, pocketed the phone, and stepped into the corridor. The corridor was narrow, lit by soft sconces that cast gentle shadows along the walls. Evelyn's footsteps echoed softly, a rhythm that contrasted sharply with the chaos she had left behind. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, to assess the burn on her skin, to acknowledge the shock of betrayal from the person she trusted most in the room. Pain and humiliation were undeniable, yet she recognized an even stronger truth. Control was hers. Strategy was hers. The ability to act decisively, silently, and with precision was hers. She thought of Lucas, of his words, of the innocence he had once embodied. She had built a life, raised a son, imparted lessons of integrity, resilience, and responsibility. And now, confronted with a betrayal that cut deeper than physical pain, she understood the necessity of restraint, patience, and calculated action. Tonight she would not respond with hysteria or rage. She would respond with intellect, with precision, with the unassailable power of someone who had weathered storms far worse than a moment's public humiliation. Evelyn's thoughts drifted briefly to the years she had spent alone, to the nights she had sewn dresses with her fingers raw from effort, to the mornings she had risen before dawn to ensure her son was fed and prepared for the day. Those memories, vivid and grounding, reminded her that she had survived far worse than this. She had faced abandonment, heartbreak, and despair. She had faced a world that often sought to diminish her worth, and she had emerged not just unbroken, but formidable. She remembered Lucas as a boy, small hands clutching hers, his eyes wide with trust and love, the boy who had once said, "I'll protect you, Mom." That boy had grown into a man, But tonight, he had failed to act. And yet Evelyn understood the complexity of love, the nuance of intention, and the unpredictability of human behavior. She would not allow this failure to define her. Instead, she would channel it, transforming betrayal into fuel, humiliation into strategy, and pain into clarity. The corridor led to the outside, the cool night air a sharp contrast to the heat and chaos inside. Evelyn inhaled deeply, feeling the tension in her muscles ease slightly. The world outside was quiet, indifferent, yet she felt the power of choice in her hands. She had survived the assault, endured the betrayal, and retained her dignity. The night was far from over, and what she chose to do next would define not only her evening, but the course of the events that would unfold in the days to come. She took a step toward her car, each movement deliberate, each breath measured. The city lights stretched out before her, a ribbon of possibility, a canvas for the actions she was about to take. Evelyn Parker, woman of strength, mother of a son she had raised with love and patience, was no longer merely reacting. She was planning, calculating, poised to reclaim the power that had been momentarily challenged. Pain and humiliation were temporary. Dignity, strategy, and resilience were permanent. And as she slid into the driver's seat, the car doors closing softly behind her, Evelyn allowed herself a quiet, private acknowledgement of the truth she had carried through every hardship. No one had the right to diminish her, and no act of cruelty, however brazen, could take from her the strength that had been forged in the fires of her life. Tonight she had been tested. Tonight she had endured. And the real reckoning, the one that Victoria Langley could not anticipate, was only just beginning.
Evelyn Parker sat in the driver's seat, the night air cool against the raw heat of her face, her blouse clinging stubbornly, a reminder of the audacity she had endured. The city lights blurred as her mind raced, cataloging every detail from the reception, every slight, every expression, every word unsaid but understood. Her body ached from the burn, yet a sharper ache gnawed at her heart. Lucas's silence, the betrayal that had carved itself into the night, echoing louder than any shout. She pressed her hands to the steering wheel, closed her eyes briefly, and allowed herself a single, controlled breath. Then she did something she had been preparing for, quietly for weeks. She reached into her clutch and retrieved her phone, the device feeling heavier than it should have in her hand. Evelyn had always been meticulous, planning contingencies, anticipating the unpredictability of life. Yet the audacity of tonight demanded a level of strategy that few could comprehend. The number she dialed was not just any number. It belonged to someone with power, influence, and the capacity to alter the trajectory of events that had spiraled wildly beyond polite social boundaries. Her fingers hovered over the keypad for a fraction of a second, the weight of what she was about to do pressing against her chest like a physical force. "It's time," she whispered softly to herself, a mantra that combined both calm and fury. The line connected, and a familiar, authoritative voice answered, measured, precise, and devoid of surprise. Evelyn's lips curved into the tiniest hint of a smile. The night's humiliation would not define her. Not now, not ever. "Good evening," she said, her tone steady, controlled, yet infused with the quiet authority that had always served her so well. "We have a situation." There was a pause on the other end, brief but loaded with understanding. Evelyn exhaled slowly, a small release of tension she had been holding since the first glint of malice crossed Victoria Langley's face. She allowed herself a moment to reflect, to plan, to fully comprehend the gravity of her own strategy. She was no longer simply a mother enduring public humiliation. She was a force, poised to reclaim control, to exact precision with patience, to turn an unprovoked attack into a statement that no one in Lucas's world would forget. Her inner monologue churned, a mixture of controlled anger and tactical clarity.
Victoria thought she could demean me, humiliate me, make me disappear into the background of this celebration. She misjudged everything. She underestimated the years, the experience, the fire that has burned quietly within me since I became a widow, since I raised Lucas alone, since I built a life with nothing but my own hands and resilience. The line remained open, the faint hum of connection, a subtle drumbeat against the rapid pulse in Evelyn's veins. She visualized the steps she would take, the outcome she desired, the dominoes that would inevitably fall once she set the plan in motion. Calm, strategic, precise. That is how this unfolds. Not with anger, not with hysteria, not with reaction. Control is mine. Outside, the night pressed softly against the car windows, indifferent to the intensity of the moment. The streets of Buckhead stretched quietly, as though holding their collective breath in anticipation of the chain reaction that would soon be unleashed. Evelyn's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, her reflection ghostly in the dim street light, a mix of pain, dignity, and unspoken power. This face, marked by fire and betrayal, will witness a reckoning the likes of which Victoria could never anticipate. She spoke again, outlining the situation with measured precision, careful to include only the details that would provoke immediate understanding without compromising the subtlety of her plan. Every word, every pause, every inflection had purpose. Evelyn Parker was not merely recounting events. She was scripting the future, orchestrating the consequences of a night that began with scandal and humiliation, but would end with revelation and justice.
There was a momentary silence on the line, the kind that is pregnant with anticipation, when the listener processes strategy, considers logistics, and prepares to act. Evelyn felt a thrill, subtle but undeniable, ripple through her. Yes, this is right. This is controlled. This is precise. She allowed herself a fleeting sense of satisfaction, tempered immediately by the awareness that the real challenge was only beginning. Victoria Langley believed the night belonged to her, that the room would remember Evelyn Parker only as the victim of a brazen public attack. She could not have been more wrong. Evelyn's mind replayed the scene in slow motion, the glint of Victoria's eyes, the way she lifted the bowl with deliberate grace, the moment the hot gumbo made contact, and Lucas's words slicing through her awareness. Everything is cataloged, every detail, every reaction, every silence. That slow motion clarity gave her not fear, but power. Evelyn knew precisely how to wield the knowledge she had accumulated over a lifetime of observation and survival. She understood the stakes, she understood the players, and she understood the precision required to turn tonight's chaos into a narrative controlled entirely by her. The call continued, Evelyn's voice soft but commanding, outlining the necessary steps with a balance of urgency and calm. Victoria must not see this coming. Lucas must remain unaware of the orchestration behind the curtain. The guests must remain spectators, not participants. Precision, subtlety, revelation. Every phrase was calculated, every instruction delivered with an economy of language that belied the magnitude of what she was arranging. As the conversation concluded, Evelyn felt the weight of expectations settle over her like a cloak. She hung up, the line going dead with a finality that echoed louder than any words could. She placed the phone carefully back in her clutch, hand steady despite the lingering sting on her face and the heat of humiliation that still crawled beneath her skin. Now, she thought, we wait, and when the time comes, the truth will emerge with undeniable force. Evelyn allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought of the years of struggle that had brought her here, the night she had cried alone over bills and obligations, the day she had risen before dawn to sew gowns and dresses with fingers raw and bleeding, the countless hours spent nurturing a child with love, discipline, and patience. All of it had prepared her for this exact moment, a test not merely of endurance, but of intellect, strategy, and emotional mastery. Victoria Langley had believed she could destabilize Evelyn with fire, with humiliation, with arrogance. She was about to learn that the fire she had unleashed would ignite something far more formidable than she could ever anticipate. The streets of Buckhead were quiet now, the soft hum of the city a counterpoint to the storm that swirled within Evelyn. Her pulse had steadied, her mind sharpened, her strategy clear. The calm she projected was not passive, it was kinetic, charged with the potential for action that Victoria could not see, anticipate, or control. Evelyn Parker, who had endured betrayal, pain, and loss, was no longer reacting. She was initiating, orchestrating, and preparing for the moment of revelation that would shift the balance of power irrevocably. Every memory of Lucas's childhood, every lesson in resilience she had taught, every challenge she had faced alone converged in this moment. Evelyn understood that power lay not in brute force, but in patience, in observation, in the ability to act decisively when the world least expects it. Tonight she had endured the unthinkable. Tonight she had reclaimed the narrative. And soon the consequences of Victoria Langley's hubris would unfold with a clarity and precision that every observer would be astonished, questioning, and in awe. She started the engine, the low hum a comforting vibration beneath her. The cool night air swept through the slightly opened windows, carrying away some of the physical discomfort, but leaving the mental anticipation sharp, focused. Evelyn Parker, strategist, mother, survivor, and architect of her own destiny, knew the night was far from over. The real reckoning, the unveiling of truth and consequence, was still to come. Victoria Langley had acted. Evelyn would respond, and the audience, every guest, every player, every hidden observer, would witness the emergence of a force they could never have predicted. She exhaled, closing her eyes for a fraction of a second, allowing herself the tiniest private smile. The humiliation, the pain, the betrayal, none of it had diminished her. Instead, it had crystallized her resolve, sharpened her strategy, and ignited a quiet, deadly anticipation. The secret call had set the reels in motion, and when those wheels completed their course, the night, the banquet hall, and every single person who had witnessed her endurance would remember Evelyn Parker not as a victim, but as the orchestrator of a reckoning both inevitable and unforgettable. Evelyn didn't rush. She didn't storm back into the banquet hall or demand an apology. She simply stepped out of her car, adjusted the blazer that still carried the faint smell of spilled gumbo, and walked toward the building with a calmness that felt almost unreal. The kind of calm that comes right before a storm tears the sky open. Inside, the reception had changed. The music played on, but the guests were restless, whispering, glancing repeatedly toward the double doors. Some had heard Victoria shouting earlier. Some had seen the soup. Some had simply felt the tension ripple through the room like heat from a furnace. And then, the doors opened. Evelyn entered. Every head turned. The entire hall fell into a hush so complete that even the clinking of champagne glasses froze in midair. Victoria Langley, standing near the head table, stiffened. Her painted smile trembled. She hadn't expected Evelyn to return. She had expected weakness, shame, retreat. She had expected to win. She did not expect this. Because standing behind Evelyn were two men. Clean suits, crisp badges, silent authority radiating from their every step. They weren't dramatic. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. Their presence alone shifted the atmosphere. Victoria's face drained of color. The lead agent stepped forward. "Mrs. Victoria Langley, we need to speak with you regarding an active investigation." A wave of gasps rippled through the room. Victoria blinked rapidly, trying to summon indignation, superiority, anything to mask the rising panic tightening her throat.
I don't understand. This must be some mistake. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice soft, but cutting like cold steel. No mistake, Victoria. You've been running from consequences for a very long time. Victoria's chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. What consequences? What is this woman talking about? Evelyn didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The financial fraud at your boutique chain, the undocumented workers, the tax evasion, the hidden offshore accounts. Each word landed like a blow. The hall erupted into horrified murmurs, guests, investors, distant relatives, all of them staring at Victoria as if she had transformed before their eyes. Victoria stepped back, shaking her head violently. How do you even know about that? Evelyn met her gaze without blinking. I've known for months. Silence. Heavy. Crushing. My call tonight was to the federal investigator who has been waiting for your next mistake. Throwing soup at me didn't cause this. You caused this. I just chose the perfect moment to stop protecting a woman who never deserved it. Victoria's lips trembled into a twisted smile of disbelief. You turned me in at my daughter's wedding? No, Evelyn answered. You turned yourself in the moment you decided cruelty was power. The agent placed a gentle but firm hand on Victoria's arm. Ma'am, we need you to come with us. As the entire hall watched, Victoria's mask finally shattered. The arrogance, the superiority, it drained out of her like water spilling from a broken vase. Evelyn stood tall, the burn on her face glowing under the chandelier like a badge of survival, not shame. For the first time that night, she reclaimed everything Victoria tried to take: her dignity, her strength, her voice. And as Victoria was escorted out, trembling, defeated, the audience saw clearly. This was not the story of a woman burned. This was the story of a woman reborn. The moment Victoria was escorted out of the hall, the silence inside the reception felt heavier than the chandeliers above. It was the silence of broken illusions, of guests unsure whether to whisper, leave, or pretend they hadn't just witnessed the downfall of a woman who walked like royalty. But the silence didn't last long, because Lucas finally stood up. He looked at his mother, really looked at her, for the first time that night. The burn on her cheek, the red irritation, the quiet strength in her spine, and something inside him cracked. His face, usually calm and unreadable, twisted with guilt so sharp it almost looked like physical pain. Mom, his voice wavered. What have I done? The words didn't come out in a shout or dramatic cry. They came out in a trembling whisper, the kind a child uses when he realizes he has betrayed the only person who ever stood by him. Evelyn didn't answer. She just watched him, letting the weight of his own choices settle on his shoulders. Lucas took a step forward, then another, until he stood right in front of her. His voice broke openly now. I let her talk to you that way. I let her hurt you. I didn't protect you. I didn't even defend you. Guests watched with bated breath. Some held hands over their mouths. Some looked away, sensing they were witnessing something sacred. Julia, his wife, stood behind him, trembling in a different way. Gone was the naive shine in her eyes. In its place was shock, confusion, and something else, the painful realization that the mother she adored was not the woman she believed. "Julia," she whispered, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Evelyn looked at the young woman, scared, small, lost, and saw not an enemy, but a daughter caught in a storm she never asked for. "I know you didn't," Evelyn said softly. Julia burst into tears, the kind that come when everything you thought was stable collapses all at once. She covered her mouth with both hands and sobbed into Lucas's shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her, torn between comforting his wife and begging forgiveness from his mother. "Mama, I'm so sorry," Lucas said again. "I forgot who raised me. I forgot what you sacrificed. I let someone else's voice matter more than yours." His eyes were red now, matching the dim glow of fading candlelight around them. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway." Evelyn felt something deep inside her shift, not completely healed, but no longer bleeding. "Lucas," she said gently, "you made a mistake, a painful one, but mistakes only define you if you refuse to learn from them." He nodded, swallowing hard. Across the hall, guests murmured, some judging Victoria, some praising Evelyn, some simply overwhelmed by the emotional wreckage spreading through the room. But the truth was clear. Victoria stood alone now. Her daughter no longer defended her. Her son-in-law was ashamed of her. Her carefully curated image had crumbled in seconds. Meanwhile, Evelyn, burned, humiliated, betrayed, stood surrounded by growing respect. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't attacked. She hadn't lost control. She simply told the truth. And the truth had done what fire and fury never could. It had exposed everything. As the night dimmed and guests slowly drifted out, Lucas held his mother's hand with a grip that said, "I won't lose you again." And Julia, wiping her tears, whispered, "I'm so sorry for what she did to you. I know now you didn't deserve any of it." For the first time since the soup hit her skin, Evelyn felt air return to her lungs. Deep, steady, freeing. The fallout had begun, but the healing had too. The morning after the wedding felt different. Quiet in a way that wasn't empty, but cleansing. Evelyn woke up with the tenderness on her cheek where the soup had burned her. But the ache didn't carry humiliation anymore. It carried truth. It carried clarity. It carried the strange, soft beginning of healing. Sunlight spilled across her apartment's living room, touching her sewing table, the framed photos on the wall, the potted geraniums she had tended for years. Everything felt familiar, yet something inside her had shifted permanently. Like a door that had been closed for years had finally opened. Her phone buzzed. A message from Lucas. "Mom, please let me come over. I need to talk. I need to fix this." Evelyn exhaled slowly. She didn't respond immediately. Healing wasn't instant. It wasn't supposed to be. But it was allowed to begin. 2 hours later, Lucas stood outside her door, hands shaking, eyes swollen from a night without sleep. When she opened the door, he didn't speak. He just hugged her, tight, desperate, like the little boy who used to cling to her on stormy nights. "I almost lost you," he whispered into her shoulder. "I let someone twist my mind. I let someone disrespect you. I let myself forget who my mother is." Evelyn held him, feeling the weight of years of love, sacrifice, forgiveness, all pressed together in one trembling embrace. "You didn't lose me," she murmured. "You just wandered. and you found your way back. Lucas pulled away, tears streaking his face. I promise you, Mom, I will never let anyone speak to you that way again. Not my wife, not her mother, not anyone. Evelyn placed a hand on his cheek. Then learn from this. Let it make you better, not broken. Later that afternoon, Julia came by, hesitant, anxious, holding a bouquet of white lilies and looking like a child afraid to enter the principal's office. Her voice cracked as she stepped inside. I'm so sorry, Evelyn. I swear I didn't know who my mother really was. I grew up believing her version of everything. But last night, I saw the truth. I saw the way she looked at you, the way she enjoyed hurting you. I never want to be like her. Evelyn's heart softened. Pain changes people, some for worse, some for wiser. Julia, she said gently, you are not responsible for your mother's choices, but you are responsible for your own. Julia nodded, taking the words in like medicine. I want to build a family with Lucas that you're a part of, one with respect, one with honesty. Evelyn smiled, a small, warm smile that felt like the first sunlight after rain. Then start living with intention, not fear. As they sat together, mother, son, daughter-in-law, the air felt lighter, hopeful even. The kind of hope that grows from wounds, not despite them. Because healing isn't the absence of pain. Healing is choosing to grow stronger than the pain. For the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt empowered. Not because revenge had been served, but because she had reclaimed herself, her worth, her dignity. And as the day faded into evening, she realized something deeply, quietly powerful. Resilience is not what you show others. Resilience is what you rebuild within yourself. And she was rebuilding beautifully. The room fell into a thick, breathless silence. Not the peaceful kind, the dangerous kind. The kind that arrives right before a storm tears the world apart. Olivia stood frozen near the doorway, her hands trembling. She didn't blink, didn't move. Across the room, Daniel pressed his back against the wall, jaw tight, eyes flickering with the fear he wasn't used to feeling. And in the center of the tension, Margaret. Her shadow stretched long across the floor as she stepped forward, slow, controlled, like a woman walking toward her own past. Tell me, she whispered, voice cracking, why was that letter hidden for 25 years? No one exhaled. Michael swallowed hard. His fingers shook as he loosened his tie, like suddenly it was choking him. Because the truth, he muttered, was never supposed to surface. A small lamp flickered on the table beside them, casting thin lines of light across everyone's faces. It made the fear sharper, the guilt louder. Olivia's breath finally escaped her chest. What truth? Her voice sounded young and old, broken and brave. No answer, just quiet, too quiet. Then Daniel pushed himself off the wall. His voice didn't crack, it thundered. Someone say something. His shout slammed through the room. A picture frame rattled. Olivia flinched. Margaret didn't. She stepped forward until she was inches from Michael. You kept a secret from me. Not a mistake, not a misunderstanding. A secret. Michael blinked rapidly, eyes glassy, voice unsteady. I tried to protect you, Margaret. By lying? He didn't answer. Outside, the wind roared against the windows like it wanted to come in and witness the scene itself. Inside, every heartbeat felt like a drum. Daniel moved closer to Olivia, lowering his voice. Liv, You okay?" She shook her head. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she even felt them forming. They kept something from us. Something big. Margaret finally turned away from Michael, breathing fast, like her memories were chasing her. "Where's the rest of it? That letter wasn't meant to be alone." He hesitated. And that hesitation, that tiny fraction of a second, was all Margaret needed to see. "You know where it is, don't you?" Michael's shoulders sagged, a man collapsing under a weight he carried for decades. Before he could answer, a sudden pounding exploded on the front door. Bang! 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 Everyone jumped. Daniel turned sharply. "It's midnight. Who the—" Another pounding, harder. Margaret's breath hitched. Olivia grabbed Daniel's arm. Michael froze. The knocking stopped. A long, terrifying silence followed. And then a single envelope slid under the door. White, clean, unmarked. But the moment it touched the floor, Margaret whispered, "That handwriting. I know it." Daniel stiffened. Olivia covered her mouth. Michael swayed, like the world tilted beneath him. Margaret crouched slowly, fingertips trembling as she picked up the envelope. The room leaned in around her. She turned it over. No name, no address, just a date. A date none of them would ever forget. The date everything first went wrong. Margaret's breath cracked. She tore the envelope open, hands shaking so violently that the paper nearly slipped. And just as she unfolded the letter, a distant voice called her name from outside. A voice they hadn't heard in 25 years. A voice that should have been impossible. Margaret's eyes widened in horror. Daniel froze mid-breath. Olivia whispered, "No, no, this can't be real." The voice came again, louder, closer. "Margaret!" And the lights flickered. Once, twice, then everything went dark. To be continued.